He was 23 years old, already deep into his studies at Cambridge University when the dreaded plague struck that summer. The year was 1665. Isaac Newton, grabbing the few books he could, fled to his family farm at Woolsthorpe in Lincolnshire. Because of the plague, he would end up remaining there 18 months. But what an 18-month period that turned out to be. One historian, in fact, has called it the most fruitful 18 months in the intellectual history of the world. Take a look at the screen. During those months away from Cambridge, the young Newton, notice this, number 1, calculated the law of gravity. Number 2, invented the infinitesimal calculus. Number 3, developed the 3 basic laws of thermodynamics. And number 4, set down the foundation for the science of optics. And all of this while lollygagging around the family farm. But, and this was typical of Isaac Newton, he didn't tell a soul what he had done. About 20 years later, some of Britain's most illustrious intellectual luminaries are huddled around a London coffee house table. Topic of discussion tonight, heated discussion. It's the law of gravity. Finally, it's decided that Edmund Halley is to go visit Mr. Newton and inquire about his understanding of the law of gravity. By this time, Isaac Newton is the greatest mathematician in England. So, Halley arrives at Newton's office, explains in great detail the problem, and then asks for Newton's advice. Without skipping a beat, Newton turns around and fires back the very answer. But how can you possibly know that this quickly? To which Newton replied, I've worked it out long ago. Show me, Halley retorts. Now, according to the story, Newton begins to rummage all through his office and cannot find the papers he wrote up while back on the family farm. As one of his early biographers expressed it, while all of England, I like this, while all of England was looking for the law of gravity, Isaac Newton lost it. Eventually his material was published. World famous book, Principia. A book not many can understand today, but that book has revolutionized the way the world journeys now into the third millennium. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, it's hard for you and me to comprehend today the impact of Isaac Newton. His discoveries were a revolution in thought, not only intellectually, not only philosophically, but even culturally. Isaac Newton's profound impact, an Englishman, on the life of this planet in the third millennium. I think the poet Alexander Pope expressed Newton's scientific achievement best with these words. Here's Alexander Pope. Put it on the screen for you. Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, let Newton be, and all was light. Halley, commenting on Newton's work, would later write, nearer to the gods no mortal may approach. Isaac Newton, of course, was lionized in his own lifetime. In fact, he's buried in the Westminster Abbey, and I had the privilege of being right there last evening. Isaac Newton. Well, I bring up Isaac Newton to us third millennials. I'll tell you why. Newton's achievement itself, because of it, has brought a compelling direction for the entire human race. You see, Principia convinced people that the world was an ordered, coherent place that could be fully understood through science. I mean, you take a little bit of reason, take a little bit of logic, using mathematical calculations with observation, Newton made the most incredibly accurate predictions. For example, number 1, he predicted about the motion of planets. Number 2, the movement of the tides. Number 3, the precision of the equinoxes, and he was even able, through his mathematical formulas, to actually target the projected trajectory of a cannonball. So after Isaac Newton and the development of mathematical logic, it begins to dawn on the human race. Now, wait a minute. Maybe with the same kind of precision, we can calculate life on the rest of the planet. Maybe we can know the human body, maybe the human mind. Maybe we can even predict weather using Isaac Newton's discovery. Well, that's the reasoning going on. You and I need to remember all the while, same time, simultaneously, while Newton is doing his calculations on the inverse square law, or the nature of ellipses, or explaining, you remember this? You learned this in school, didn't you? The formula y to the third power plus a times x times y plus x times 2y minus a to the third power minus 2 times x to the third power equals 0. You remember that one in school? I always ended up with 0 with that one, didn't you? While Isaac Newton is calculating that incredible mathematical precision, I remind you, ladies and gentlemen, in Europe, thousands and thousands of women are being burned at the stake because they are accused of being witches. But now with the advent of Newton's rational science, suddenly people are beginning to reason, hey, wait a minute. Maybe the crops failed because we did something wrong in how we planted them, not because some old widowed hag down in the market got herbs from Farmer Jones, ticked off of the herbs, put a hex on the farm. Maybe George lost his mind, George down the block, not because the devil possessed him, but because something traumatic happened that caused him to simply lose it. Not that people hadn't thought about these things before, they had, but now, because of the incredible success of Newton's work, a whole movement towards science, towards experiment with naturalism, took off. And with this began what has been called the birth of the modern mind. And the notion, by the way, we don't need any revealed text. Don't give me ancient documents. I can figure it all out myself through experimentation. I use my reason. Everything we need to know we can learn through study, through science, through empiricism. Thank you, Isaac Newton. Although, interestingly enough, Newton himself worked on the assumption that the laws he had discovered were God's laws. "O God," he wrote, "O God, I think thy thoughts after thee." Yet it wasn't long before God was written out of the picture completely. And the momentum for that happened in France. Let me tell you this story. Frenchman Simon Pierre Laplace, who one day was showing Emperor Napoleon a copy of his book, Celestial Mechanics. Someone in advance had told Napoleon, there is no mention of the Creator in this book. And so Napoleon, who often enjoyed asking embarrassing questions, received it with the remark, "Monsieur Laplace, they tell me you've written this large book on the system of the universe, but you have not mentioned the Creator." To which Simon Pierre answered bluntly, "I have no need of that hypothesis." What a grand leap from Newton, who at one point commented, "This is the most elegant fabric of the sun, planets, and comets. It could not have arisen save by the wisdom and power of an intelligent mind." And yet we have this huge leap until finally everything can be known by humanity in our world through reason and through science. In fact, some actually came to believe that if we could perfectly calculate the position of every atom, we could perfectly predict the future because we would have it all. We would have it all down on paper. Isaac Newton, reason and logic and science. But today, who needs Isaac Newton's God hypothesis? No need for any transcendence today. And that, my friends, is precisely the legacy we have received. Because we've all been nurtured on it, haven't we? Come on. We have all been formed and shaped by it. Our culture saturated with it. Schools, science, our world, everything. In the thousands of years of recorded history, only in the past 100, perhaps even less, has there been a whole civilization erected on these purely naturalistic assumptions. All the great disciplines today, you think about them. You've got psychology, you've got medicine. What else do we have? Astronomy, physics, sociology, biology, all of it today based on the hardcore materialistic presupposition that if you use logic and reason, you can get to the bottom of it all. And please don't get me wrong. In one sense, we are indebted to all of those sciences, aren't we? Of course we are. Imagine, instead of studying gravity itself, we stuck with Aristotle and his understanding of the universe that said it takes 50 gods to hold the planets in shape. If we were still with Aristotle today, I tell you what, there wouldn't be much getting off the ground at all, let alone getting to the moon. We needed Isaac Newton. But of course, it's a two-edged sword, isn't it? Because you think about it, the same technology that sends rockets into space sends Scud missiles into homes, doesn't it? Same technology, ladies and gentlemen. The same technology that uses nuclear power to create electricity goes into dirty bombs. You've heard of that before, haven't you? However great science has been, it's taken only a few hundred years for Newton's calculation about gravity to the point where our existence today is threatened by weapons of mass destruction. Under such a specter, one could argue that maybe we'd be better off stuck with Aristotle. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever loved someone? I mean, we're talking about the love of a parent, the love of a child, a sibling. Oh, all of our hands. Of course, our hands go up. They asked a group of kids the other day to write down their definition of love. Okay, these are little kids, all right? Here's one child. This is a little girl. I know my older sister loves me because she gives me all her old clothes and has to go out and buy new ones. That little girl has something to learn in life, doesn't she? Here's another one. Oh, this is what love is. Love is if you hold hands and sit beside each other in the cafeteria. That means you're in love. Otherwise, you can sit across from each other and be okay. One more. I love this. This is a little girl. It has to be. Love is when you tell a boy you like his shirt and then he wears it every day. Oh, my. We're all authorities on love. Come on, of course. That's true. Now, because you are an authority, perhaps you'll be able to follow this. I trust you will. Do you believe that love, which is not an emotion but is a principle, this self-sacrificing that we heard about from Hans just a moment ago, do you believe that love is purely natural and of physical causes? That is, it's something that can be broken down and explained the same way you can balance an equation in chemistry? Can this love be mathematized the way the motion of a projectile can be? Or is there something in love that transcends science, that tells us there's another facet of our existence that can't be explained by materialism alone? You know, I don't want to be dogmatic about this, about what can't be proven, but there has to be something in the experience of love that you simply can't chart on a piece of graphing paper. Those of us who have been in love, I'm certain, can testify to it. It's hardly rational. It's hardly reasonable. I remember the first time I saw Karen, my bride, who was here tonight. I was a 19-year-old kid in college. I mean, the first time I saw her with my eyes wide open, you understand. I'd seen her. But I walked in that day to into the administration building of the college, and there was this very attractive 19-year-old girl sitting behind the telephone switchboard, and suddenly, with my eyes wide open, I see the green eyes, I see the pink lips, I can tell there's a figure behind it all, and something starts to happen in me. Now, look, I was smitten, and tonight we're here 3 decades later, just because of love. It really does happen to a human being. But I want to tell you something. If you had put a CAT scan on me at that moment, do an MRI, what would they have found? Okay, the boy is experiencing love. Oh, I'm sure that there would have been a burst of synaptic activity in the cerebral cortex. There might have been some extra serotonin or dopamine in the frontal lobe. I'm sure my heart rate was way up and I was sweating, just like I am now. Who knows what other chemical and biological reactions were taking place? I'm sure it's all there, all a part of it. But you know what I'm talking about. There's no way you can take the experience of a young man who is smitten by love and limit it only to the variation of the very same processes that somehow have taught our liver to excrete bile. It has to be on a different level, doesn't it? I mean, that would be like crediting Lance Armstrong's Tour de France victories to his bicycle chain. Well, he had a good chain. Impossible. Of course not. We all know that we, of course, are the sum of all the physiological processes, but love has to be more. Hey, look at your own William Shakespeare, the world's William Shakespeare. Remember his sonnets for love? Where did Shakespeare get it? Extra testosterone, was that it? A little oversupply of vitamin B? Too much Guinness? Maybe they didn't even have Guinness back then. What I'm inviting you to consider today is probably the most powerful force in human experience. It's the single force that drives most of humanity. It's the force of love. It's love for spouse, it's love for children, it's love for friends, and how are we going to explain that kind of love? Now, I've got to tell you that the prevailing scientific theories, materialistic worldview seems rather inadequate to explain the existence of love. I mean, wouldn't you agree? How are you going to put it on a chart? But you may be saying, look, Dwight, that really is not science's business. And the moment you say that, then I say, aha, there is a realm of existence that doesn't belong to science, right? Now, what is this thing? Oh, range of science and love. I think of what the German philosopher Goethe once wrote. One thing is certain. Nothing, I like this, nothing justifies a man's existence like being loved. That's pretty heavy, isn't it? Or maybe you could put it like this: nothing justifies our existence if we don't love. Either way, ladies and gentlemen, how crucial love is to us as human beings. And it's worth noting, by the way, that something as fundamental and crucial to our existence as humans is beyond, and I'm repeating myself, but it's beyond the pale of science to explain. What's up with that? As the Oxford philosopher Brian McGee once wrote, I'll put his words on the screen here, we feel that when all possible scientific questions have been answered, the problems of life remain completely untouched. Wow. But if science can't help us, then to whom, to where shall we turn? Let me humbly make a proposal. To begin with, if I look at the Darwinian model for naturalism, and by the way, you can go to the same Westminster Abbey. Charles Darwin, along with Isaac Newton, is buried in your abbey. But if we take the Darwinian model, I think we all would agree, it simply is unable to explain the existence of something we would call love. Now, I'm not here tonight to get into the creation evolutionist debate. Instead, I want to put something else on the table for you to muse, namely this. When I think about love, which involves a willingness, as we noted, to sacrifice yourself for the good of someone else, be willing to empty yourself of all that's yours. When I think about love and the human experience of this which heretofore remains a bit inexplicable, but when I think about love, I'm wondering, do we find it in the formative beginning stages of what the Darwinian model proposes? Do we have love for the Neanderthals? Or if natural selection operates by the survival of the fittest, it would seem to me that love would have gone off the scene with winged dinosaurs, wouldn't it? I mean, why would you have love? If natural selection says that the survivor is the one who wins, you can't have a Hans who says, I lose so that you could win. What is this thing of love? Is the Darwinian model sufficient? Self-sacrificing human love. By the way, I know that some scientists say, hey, now wait a minute. There'll be times when a baboon will sacrifice herself for the sake of keeping the baboon genes going on. Well, you may be able to read a baboon's mind. I don't know. But when we're dealing with altruism, as a moment ago we talked about, how do we explain it? Is the Darwinian model sufficient? How does the human experience of love fit into that model? At what point do we move to a transition, to this higher ideal? And by the way, the moment we say higher ideal, well, who determined what the higher ideal is? Something has established our pantheon of ideals. Where did that come from? It can't be science. Let's look at it this way. Take a potter. The greatest potter in all of England. Give him, give her all the clay she needs. And then give her 1 billion years. You can take 1 billion years, but out of this clay, madam, please construct an internal combustion engine. And that potter works, and that potter works. But isn't it true, ladies and gentlemen, that no matter how much time you give to that potter with that clay, those potters will never turn clay into an internal combustion engine? Will they? Impossible. Why? Because clay is not inherently possessive of the fire you need to get an internal combustion engine to explode, to make it run. They have to pour something in from outside of it, something greater than the clay, something different. The clay to be turned into a working engine only will happen if qualities not inherent to it are added by somebody or something. Isn't that true? Does that make sense? Yeah. In the same way, how can you take carbon, a little bit of water, and some protein, and some quarks and electrons, and how can you just mix them all up together and voila, you have self-sacrificing human love? How does that work? How has love been formed within us? A moment ago I mentioned Laplace. You remember that? Laplace's quip to Napoleon? I have no need of that hypothesis. Someone later heard of Laplace's answer and responded, too bad, because it's such a beautiful hypothesis. It explains so many things. Maybe the God hypothesis of Isaac Newton, maybe that God hypothesis explains love too. Maybe love isn't something that emerges within our biological system. Maybe love has to come from outside of us, stamped into us. I want to suggest a perspective on this subject. And I want to read, to do this, I want to read 2 lines from an ancient document. The name of the ancient document is the Bible. I realize there's a lot of controversy today about the Bible, and maybe one of these days you and I can get into it. But I think we're all safe in saying there has never been a book on this planet that has exerted as significant an influence. Would we buy that? Yeah. So at least you owe it to yourself to hear what the book is saying. 2 little lines. First text comes out of the Bible's first book, first chapter. I'll put it on the screen for you. The book is called Genesis, and here's this one line, Genesis 1:27. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to profess to be able to explain what that text really means. That's pretty heavy. But I get enough of a sense from that text to suggest that it's saying human beings, male and female, we are together made in the image of God. Which doesn't mean that God has 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes on each foot, and has a digestive system. Not at all. But there's something about God that's been printed into our psyche. So here comes that second line. It's at the other end of the book. It's from one of the letters that John wrote. The line is a short one. It goes like this: God is love. In many ways, I have to tell you that that single line is even more difficult to explain than the line from Genesis. However, while I don't know exactly what all those 3 words mean either, what it does tell me is that love is the dominant feature of His being. God is love. Now, you put the 2 texts together. Let's do a little bit of Newtonian mathematics. Put the 2 texts together. One says we are created in the image of God. The other text says God is love. Wow, could it mean that we who are made in the image of God, by being made in that image, we are able to love as well? Maybe that's where it came from. Maybe like the clay, it had to come from outside of us because there isn't enough clay and enough billions to let it arise naturally within us. Or, I mean, where else could it come from? Is it the carbon? Is it the electron? Is it the tissue? For me, these 2 texts explain what is essentially inexplicable. The ability of material beings, beings made out of things that in and of themselves are incapable of love. Nevertheless, beings who are capable, who are able to love. I realize that if you don't think love is something that comes from outside of you, that it is in fact just a part of the biological process, a purely materialistic sort of phenomenon, you're saying, man, Dwight, I'm not putting much stock in your answer at all. But what I'm proposing is this: if, on the other hand, something within your heart just isn't satisfied with a purely materialistic explanation, if your love for your parents, your love for your child, your spouse, your best friend, if that love of yours is too precious to be relegated to chemical reactions, then perhaps you're sensing a bit of the divine in you. Could it be you are touching a part of the world that science and logic and reason and math are simply too crude to enter? If you've known the joy, if you've known the passion, the transcendence of love, if love has taken you to realms where nothing else has or could, then you've been to a place Newton's physics cannot enter. And Isaac Newton would, I believe, be the first to agree that they were never meant to go there in the first place.